A waitress serves food to a humble boy without knowing he's the restaurant owner's son. What happened next left everyone speechless and changed multiple lives forever. The fluorescent lights of Miller's Diner flickered as 23-year-old Emma Torres wiped down the same sticky table for the third time that evening. Her feet ached in her worn sneakers, and her apron was stained with ketchup from the lunch rush that had ended hours ago. But none of that compared to the weight she felt in her chest when she saw the small figure huddled in the corner booth, near the kitchen entrance. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 years old, wearing clothes that hung loose on his thin frame, his dark hair falling over eyes that darted nervously around the diner. He had been sitting there for over an hour, nursing a glass of water that the previous waitress had grudgingly poured for him. Emma had watched him pull out a crumpled dollar bill from his pocket at least 5 times, counting it carefully each time as if hoping it might magically multiply. Her manager, a gruff man named Harvey, had already walked past the booth twice, shooting the kid disapproving glances that made Emma's blood boil. "Hey kid, you gonna order something or just take up space all night?" Harvey's voice cut through the low murmur of the diner, loud enough that several customers turned to look. The boy's face flushed red, and he seemed to shrink into the booth, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. Emma felt something twist inside her chest, a familiar ache that reminded her of nights when she was younger, sitting in places she couldn't afford, hoping nobody would notice she didn't belong. Without thinking, Emma grabbed a menu and walked straight to the booth, sliding into the seat across from the boy before Harvey could say another word. The kid looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes, and she saw something there that made her heart break. Not just hunger, though that was clearly written across his pale face, but a desperate kind of hope mixed with shame that no child should ever have to feel. "Hey there, I'm Emma," she said softly, keeping her voice gentle and warm. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, his gaze flickering between Emma and the dollar bill still clutched in his small hand. "Tommy," he whispered, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. "I only have $1. Is that enough for something?" Emma glanced at the menu, knowing full well that nothing on it cost just $1 anymore, not even the side of fries. She could feel Harvey's eyes boring into the back of her head from across the diner, could practically hear his complaints about her wasting time on a customer who couldn't pay. But something in Tommy's expression, that mixture of pride and desperation, reminded her so much of herself at that age that she couldn't bring herself to care about Harvey's disapproval. "You know what, Tommy?" Emma said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "You're in luck. We have a special today that's exactly $1. Tommy's eyes widened with disbelief and hope. "Really? What kind of special?" he asked, his voice still barely above a whisper, but with a tremor of excitement creeping in. Emma felt her heart clench at how easily he believed her, how willing he was to accept this small kindness without question. She stood up, tucking the menu under her arm. "It's a surprise special, but I promise you're going to love it," she said with a wink. "You just sit tight, okay?" As Emma walked toward the kitchen, she could feel multiple sets of eyes following her, including Harvey's suspicious glare. She knew what she was about to do was against policy, knew it might come out of her paycheck or worse, but she couldn't shake the image of Tommy's thin face and hungry eyes. Behind the swinging kitchen doors, she quickly grabbed a plate and started loading it with food. A cheeseburger, fries, a side of coleslaw, and even a chocolate milkshake. Her coworker, an older woman named Rita, raised her eyebrows questioningly. "That order's not on any ticket," Rita observed, wiping her hands on her apron. Emma met her gaze steadily. "I know, it's for the kid in booth 7. Consider it my dinner break meal," she said firmly, though her heart was pounding. Emma carried the loaded plate back through the diner, acutely aware of Harvey starting to move toward her from behind the counter. She walked faster, reaching Tommy's booth just as her manager opened his mouth to protest. The look on Tommy's face when she set down the plate made every risk worth it. His eyes went impossibly wide, his mouth falling open in shock as he stared at the mountain of food in front of him. This is the $1 special?" he stammered, looking up at Emma with confusion and wonder. "Yep," Emma said, sliding the milkshake across the table. "Eat up before it gets cold." For a moment, Tommy just stared at the food, and Emma worried he might cry. Then his stomach growled loudly enough that she could hear it, and he grabbed the burger with both hands, taking a huge bite. The pure relief and joy on his face as he chewed made Emma's eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Emma," Harvey's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "A word. Now." She glanced at Tommy, who had paused mid-bite, fear creeping back into his expression. Emma gave him what she hoped was a reassuring smile. "Keep eating, sweetie. I'll be right back," she said, then turned to face her manager. Harvey jerked his head toward the back hallway, his face red with barely contained anger. As Emma followed Harvey into the narrow hallway behind the kitchen, she braced herself for what was coming. The manager's face was twisted with anger. His jaw clenched so tight she could see a vein pulsing in his temple. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed, keeping his voice low but furious. "That's a $20 meal you just gave away to some street kid who walked in here with pocket change." Emma squared her shoulders, refusing to back down, even though her heart was hammering in her chest. "He's a child, Harvey. A hungry child. I couldn't just let him sit there," she said firmly. Harvey let out a harsh laugh that held no humor. "Oh, so now you're Mother Teresa? This is a business, Emma, not a charity. That food comes out of our profits, which means it comes out of my bonus." "Then take it out of my paycheck," Emma shot back, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "I'll pay for every cent of that meal, but I'm not apologizing for feeding a hungry kid." Harvey's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're on thin ice, Torres. This is the third time this month you've pulled something like this. First it was the free coffee for that homeless guy, then the extra fries for the single mom. Now this." Emma felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "Those people needed help, Harvey. That's what being human is about," she said quietly. The manager shook his head, his expression a mixture of frustration and something that might have been grudging respect. "You've got a good heart, kid, but a good heart doesn't pay the bills. One more stunt like this and you're done here. Understood?" Before Emma could respond, Rita's voice called from the kitchen. "Harvey, phone call for you. Says it's urgent." Harvey pointed a warning finger at Emma. "We're not done talking about this. Get back to work." He growled, then stalked off toward his office. Emma leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly shaky as the adrenaline drained from her body. She took a deep breath, composing herself before heading back to the dining area. When she emerged from the hallway, she was surprised to see that Tommy had finished most of his meal and was carefully sipping the milkshake, his eyes half closed in contentment. The transformation in the boy was remarkable. The fearful, hunched posture was gone, replaced by a more relaxed demeanor that made him look like what he was, just a regular kid enjoying a good meal. "How was everything?" Emma asked, sliding into the booth across from him again. Tommy looked up at her, and for the first time she saw a real smile on his face. "It was the best thing I've ever eaten," he said softly. "Thank you so much, Miss Emma. I was really hungry." The simple honesty in his words made Emma's chest tighten. "You're very welcome, sweetie," she said gently. "Can I ask you something? Where are your parents? Does someone know you're here?" Tommy's smile faltered slightly, and he looked down at the table. "My dad? He's working. He's always working. I walked here by myself because I was hungry and I found $1 on the street." The answer raised more questions than it answered, and Emma felt a flutter of concern. "Does your dad know where you are?" she pressed gently. Tommy shrugged, still not meeting her eyes. "He thinks I'm at my friend Marcus's house, but Marcus had to go to his grandma's today, so I just walked around. I didn't want to bother my dad at work." Something about the way he said it, the resignation in his young voice, made Emma's heart ache. This was a kid who was used to being alone, used to taking care of himself. "What's your dad's name, Tommy? Maybe we should call him and let him know you're okay," Emma suggested carefully. The boy's eyes widened with panic. "No, please don't call him. He'll be so mad that I left the neighborhood. He told me to stay close to home." Emma bit her lip, torn between respecting the kid's wishes and knowing that somewhere, a parent must be worried sick. Just then, the bell above the diner's entrance chimed, and Emma glanced up automatically. A man in an expensive suit walked in, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression tense and worried. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair and sharp features that spoke of both exhaustion and stress. There was something commanding about his presence that made people instinctively step aside as he moved through the diner. Emma noticed Rita emerge from the kitchen, her eyes widening as she recognized the newcomer. The older waitress quickly smoothed her apron and rushed over to greet him, something she never did for regular customers. "Mr. Caldwell, we weren't expecting you tonight," Rita said, her voice filled with unusual deference. Emma froze, her stomach dropping as the name registered. Caldwell, as in James Caldwell, the owner of Miller's Diner and half a dozen other restaurants across the city. The man barely acknowledged Rita's greeting, his eyes scanning the diner with growing desperation. "I'm looking for a boy. 7 years old, dark hair, probably looks scared or lost. Has anyone seen a kid matching that description?" he asked urgently, his voice carrying across the quiet restaurant. Emma felt Tommy stiffen beside her, and when she looked at him, all the color had drained from his face. The kid's eyes were locked on the man in the suit with an expression of fear mixed with something else. Recognition. "Dad?" Tommy whispered, so quietly Emma almost didn't hear it. Everything clicked into place in that moment. The expensive-looking clothes that hung too loose on Tommy's frame, clearly bought with room to grow. The way he spoke, articulate and polite despite his hunger. The fact that he had wandered this far from home without anyone noticing until now. And most importantly, the undeniable resemblance between the frightened boy in the booth and the desperate man scanning the diner. James Caldwell's head snapped in their direction at the sound of his son's voice. Relief flooded his features as he rushed toward their booth, and Emma instinctively moved to stand, putting herself slightly between them. She didn't know what was happening, but every protective instinct she had was screaming. The restaurant owner reached the booth, his hands shaking as he looked at his son. "Tommy, thank God. I've been searching everywhere for you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. But what happened next was something Emma would never forget, and it would reveal a truth about this family that would shake everything she thought she understood. Tommy didn't run to his father. Instead, he shrank back into the booth, his small body tensing like he was preparing for a blow that never came. James Caldwell stopped a few feet away, seeming to sense his son's reluctance, his hands dropping to his sides in a gesture of helpless frustration. "Tommy, I was so worried. Why did you leave the house? You know you're supposed to stay with the nanny," he said, his voice gentler now but still strained with emotion. "Mrs. Patterson fell asleep again," Tommy mumbled, not meeting his father's eyes. "I was hungry and she didn't make lunch, so I left." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Emma saw James Caldwell's face go pale. The restaurant owner closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, there was something broken in his expression that made Emma's initial protective anger soften just slightly. "I'm so sorry, son. I didn't know. I thought Mrs. Patterson was taking care of you," James said, his voice thick with guilt. He finally seemed to notice Emma standing there, and his eyes traveled to the empty plate on the table, the nearly finished milkshake, the crumpled dollar bill still sitting beside Tommy's hand. "Did you buy him that meal?" he asked Emma, confusion evident in his voice. Emma lifted her chin, meeting his gaze squarely. "He came in hungry with only $1. I wasn't going to let a child go without eating," she said firmly. "I didn't know he was your son, Mr. Caldwell. I just saw a kid who needed help." Something flickered across James Caldwell's face, an emotion Emma couldn't quite read. It might have been shame or gratitude or perhaps a mixture of both. "You work here?" he asked, though it was obvious from her uniform. When Emma nodded, he turned to look at the kitchen, where Harvey had emerged and was now standing frozen, his face a mask of panic as he realized what was happening. "And your manager, did he approve this?" James asked, his voice taking on a harder edge. Emma felt her stomach drop but refused to show it. "No, sir, I paid for it myself, or I will once it comes out of my paycheck," she said steadily. "Harvey told me I was on thin ice for helping people who couldn't afford to pay full price, but I'd do it again." The words came out stronger than she felt, and she saw James Caldwell's expression shift into something unreadable. James Caldwell was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between Emma, his son, and the manager who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Finally he spoke, and his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the diner stop what they were doing to listen. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. My son walked into my own restaurant, hungry and with only $1, and the staff was going to turn him away?" Harvey stepped forward, his face red and sweaty. "Mr. Caldwell, sir, I had no idea he was your son. The kid looked like just another street kid trying to get a free meal," he stammered. "We have policies about these situations. We can't just give away food to every person who walks in without money." The explanation sounded weak even to Emma's ears, and she could see the fury building in James Caldwell's expression. "Policies," James repeated, the word dripping with contempt. "You have policies about not feeding hungry children in a restaurant that I built on the principle of serving the community?" His voice was dangerously quiet now, the kind of quiet that preceded a storm. Harvey opened his mouth to respond but seemed to think better of it. James turned his attention back to Emma, and she braced herself for whatever was coming. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone softer now. Emma Torres, sir, she replied, her heart pounding. And how long have you worked here, Emma? The question seemed odd given the circumstances, but she answered anyway. Almost 2 years now. 2 years, James repeated, nodding slowly. And in those 2 years, how many times have you helped people who couldn't afford to pay? Emma hesitated, glancing at Harvey, whose face had gone from red to an unhealthy shade of gray. I don't know, sir. I never really counted. I just help when I can, she admitted. The restaurant owner studied her for a moment, and Emma couldn't read his expression. Before anyone could say anything else, Tommy's small voice broke the tension. Dad, please don't be mad at Miss Emma. She was really nice to me. She didn't make me feel bad about only having $1. The boy's words were simple, but they carried a weight that seemed to hit James Caldwell right in the chest. He looked at his son, really looked at him, and Emma saw something crack in his carefully maintained composure. Emma watched as James Caldwell crouched down beside the booth, bringing himself to eye level with Tommy. I'm not mad at Miss Emma, son. Actually, I think she might be the only person in this building who did the right thing today, he said quietly. Then he looked up at Emma, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like respect. Tell me, Emma, have you ever thought about doing something more than waiting tables? Emma blinked, completely thrown by the unexpected question. I'm sorry. What? She asked, certain she had misheard. James Caldwell stood up, his business demeanor returning as he seemed to make a decision. I'm serious. Someone with your compassion and integrity is exactly the kind of person I need working in management. Not hiding in the back of a diner because my current manager has his priorities backwards. Harvey made a strangled sound of protest, but James held up a hand, silencing him without even looking in his direction. Emma, I want to offer you a position as assistant manager at my flagship restaurant downtown. Better hours, better pay, and a chance to actually make a difference in how we treat our customers. The offer hung in the air, so unexpected that Emma couldn't quite process it. Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I don't have any management experience, Emma said, trying to wrap her head around what was happening. I'm just a waitress who happened to do the decent thing. James shook his head, a slight smile appearing on his tired face. You have something more valuable than experience. You have empathy, and you have the courage to act on it even when it might cost you. Tommy was watching the exchange with wide eyes, a small smile forming on his face. Emma looked at the boy, then back at his father, and felt the surreal nature of the situation wash over her. 20 minutes ago, she had been expecting to lose her job. Now the owner of the entire restaurant chain was offering her a promotion. I need some time to think about it, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. Of course, James said, pulling a business card from his pocket. Take all the time you need. My personal number is on there. Call me when you've decided. He handed her the card, and Emma took it with slightly trembling fingers. The embossed lettering seemed to gleam under the diner's fluorescent lights, a tangible reminder that this was really happening. James turned his attention back to his son, placing a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. Come on, buddy, let's get you home. We need to have a serious talk about Mrs. Patterson and about why you felt like you couldn't call me when you were hungry. Tommy nodded, sliding out of the booth. But before he left, he turned back to Emma and wrapped his thin arms around her waist in a quick, fierce hug. Thank you, Miss Emma, Tommy whispered against her apron. You're the nicest person I've ever met. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes as she hugged the boy back, her heart breaking a little at how desperate he seemed for simple kindness. You're very welcome, sweetheart. Make sure your dad feeds you properly from now on, okay? She said softly, and Tommy nodded before pulling away. As James Caldwell guided his son toward the exit, he paused and turned back to address the entire diner. Harvey, my office, 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. We are going to have a very long discussion about company values and what it means to serve this community. The manager's face went from gray to ghostly white, and he nodded mutely. Then James looked at Emma one more time. Think about my offer, Emma. I mean it. The moment the door closed behind them, the entire diner erupted in whispers and shocked conversations. Rita rushed over to Emma, her eyes shining with something like pride. Girl, did that really just happen? Did James Caldwell just offer you a job? She asked, gripping Emma's arm. Emma looked down at the business card in her hand, still trying to believe it herself. I think so. I'm not really sure what just happened. What just happened is that you did something good, and for once you got rewarded for it instead of punished. Rita said firmly. Don't you dare turn down that offer, Emma Torres. You deserve better than this place, and we both know it. Emma glanced over at Harvey, who was slumped against the counter looking like he'd aged 10 years in the last 20 minutes. Part of her felt bad for him, but a larger part remembered all the times he'd yelled at her for showing basic human decency. The rest of Emma's shift passed in a blur of curious questions from customers and co-workers, all wanting to know what had been said, what had happened, whether she was really going to leave Miller's Diner for some fancy downtown restaurant. Emma answered as best as she could, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the evening's events over and over, trying to understand how her life had just changed so dramatically. What would you do if you were in Emma's position? Would you take the risk and accept the offer from someone you just met, even if it meant leaving behind everything familiar? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. When Emma finally clocked out at 11 that night, her feet hurt worse than ever, but her mind was racing too fast to notice. She walked to the bus stop in the cool evening air, pulling out the business card and reading it under the streetlight. James Caldwell, CEO, Caldwell Restaurant Group. The title seemed impossibly grand, almost unreal. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to find a text from her roommate asking if she was okay, if she'd heard about some commotion at the diner. News traveled fast in their small circle, and Emma realized she'd have to explain everything when she got home. She typed out a quick reply saying she was fine and would explain everything soon, then pocketed her phone and stared out at the empty street. The late-night bus was running behind schedule, giving her more time to think, which both helped and made everything more confusing. Could she really do this? Could she step into a management role with no experience, just because she'd fed a hungry kid? The bus finally arrived and Emma climbed aboard, finding a seat near the back. As the vehicle rumbled through the quiet streets, she noticed her reflection in the dark window and barely recognized herself. She looked tired, sure, but there was something else in her expression now. Hope, maybe, or possibility. For so long, she'd been stuck in survival mode, just trying to pay rent and keep food on her own table. The idea that she could have more, be more, felt almost dangerous to believe in. Her mind drifted to Tommy, wondering if he was home safe now, if his father had fired the negligent nanny, if they were having the conversation about communication and care that clearly needed to happen. The boy's words echoed in her head. "You're the nicest person I've ever met." How sad was it that a simple act of feeding a hungry child seemed like extraordinary kindness to him? What kind of life had he been living that made such basic compassion remarkable? Emma thought about her own childhood, about the times she'd gone hungry, about the strangers who had helped her when they didn't have to, a teacher who always seemed to have extra snacks in her desk drawer, a neighbor who would invite Emma over for dinner, knowing her mother was working double shifts and wouldn't be home until late, a librarian who pretended not to notice when Emma would stay in the public library until closing time during winter, seeking warmth and safety. Those small acts of kindness had shaped her, had taught her that compassion mattered, that helping others was never wrong. By the time Emma reached her apartment building, she had made up her mind. She would call James Caldwell tomorrow and accept his offer, not because she thought she deserved it, but because she wanted to be in a position where she could help more people, where her impulse to care wouldn't be seen as a policy violation but as an asset. She wanted to prove that kindness and business success weren't mutually exclusive, and maybe, just maybe, she wanted to make sure that no other child would walk into one of those restaurants and be turned away when they needed help most. The next morning, Emma woke up early despite having gone to bed late, her mind still buzzing with the previous night's events. She made herself coffee in the tiny kitchen she shared with her roommate, Jasmine, who was already awake and practically vibrating with curiosity. "Okay, you have to tell me everything," Jasmine demanded, sitting at their small table with her own mug. "The group chat has been going crazy. People are saying you got promoted by the owner himself?" Emma sat down and recounted the entire story. From Tommy sitting alone in the booth, to the confrontation with Harvey, to James Caldwell's unexpected job offer. Jasmine listened with wide eyes, occasionally interrupting with gasps or questions. When Emma finished, her roommate sat back with a stunned expression. "Emma, that's insane. That's like something out of a movie. Are you really going to take the job?" she asked. "I think I have to," Emma replied, turning the business card over in her hands. "This doesn't feel like an opportunity I should pass up. Besides, what's the alternative? Keep working for Harvey, always looking over my shoulder, always worried that helping someone will get me fired?" Jasmine nodded emphatically. "Exactly. Plus this James Caldwell guy clearly values what you did. That has to count for something. Emma pulled out her phone, staring at the number on the card. It was only 8 in the morning, probably too early to call, but James had said to contact him when she'd made her decision. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves, and dialed before she could talk herself out of it. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "James Caldwell," he said, his tone professional but not unfriendly. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Emma Torres, from the diner," Emma said, her voice slightly shaky. There was a brief pause, and then his tone warmed considerably. "Emma, I was hoping you'd call. Have you thought about my offer?" he asked. She could hear sounds in the background, the rustle of papers, a door closing, suggesting he was already at work, despite the early hour. "I have, and I'd like to accept, if the position is still available," Emma said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. There was genuine pleasure in James's voice when he responded. "That's excellent news. Can you come to my office this afternoon? We can discuss the details, go over your contract, and I'll introduce you to the team at the flagship location." Emma agreed, scribbling down the address he gave her, and they set a meeting time for 2 that afternoon. After hanging up, Emma sat for a moment in stunned silence, staring at the phone in her hand. "I just did that. I actually just accepted a management position," she said aloud, and Jasmine let out a squeal of excitement, jumping up to hug her. "This is amazing. We need to find you something professional to wear. Do you have anything that says manager and not waitress?" her roommate asked, already heading toward their shared closet. The truth was, Emma's wardrobe consisted mainly of her work uniforms and casual clothes. She owned exactly one dress that could be considered business appropriate, a simple navy blue sheath dress she'd bought for a cousin's wedding 2 years ago. Jasmine pulled it out, examining it critically. "This could work. Pair it with your black flats and that cardigan, and you'll look professional enough," she declared. Emma nodded, grateful for her roommate's help, even as butterflies started doing acrobatics in her stomach. The hours until the meeting crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emma tried to distract herself by researching the Caldwell restaurant group online, learning about their various locations, their mission statement about community service and quality food, and finding several articles about James Caldwell himself. Most painted him as a shrewd businessman who had built his empire from a single diner his grandfather opened in the 1950s. There were mentions of his late wife, who had passed away 2 years earlier, and how he'd become a single father while running multiple businesses. Reading about his wife's death put Tommy's situation into sharper focus. The boy wasn't just neglected, he was grieving and being raised by a father who was clearly drowning in responsibility and grief himself. Emma's heart ached for both of them, understanding now why Tommy had seemed so desperate for simple kindness, why James had looked so broken when he realized his son had been hungry and scared. They were a family trying to survive a tragedy, stumbling through each day as best they could. At 1:30, Emma was dressed and ready, having changed her outfit 3 times before Jasmine physically stopped her from changing again. "You look perfect, professional, capable, and like yourself. Now go before you're late," her roommate said, practically pushing her out the door. Emma took the bus downtown, watching as the neighborhoods gradually shifted from her working-class area to the gleaming high-rises and upscale shops of the business district. The Caldwell Restaurant Group headquarters occupied 3 floors of a modern glass building that made Emma feel impossibly small and out of place. She gave her name to the receptionist, a polished woman in her 40s who smiled warmly and made a quick phone call. "Mr. Caldwell is expecting you. Take the elevator to the 12th floor. His assistant will meet you there," the receptionist said, gesturing toward the bank of elevators. Emma thanked her and stepped into the elevator, watching the numbers climb and trying to calm her racing heart. The elevator doors opened onto a sleek reception area, where a young man in a crisp shirt immediately stood up with a welcoming smile. "Miss Torres, I'm Marcus Chen, Mr. Caldwell's executive assistant. He's just finishing up a call, but he'll be ready for you in just a moment," Marcus said, gesturing to a comfortable seating area. Emma sat down, taking in her surroundings and trying not to look as overwhelmed as she felt. The walls displayed framed photos of various Caldwell restaurants over the decades, showing the evolution from the original small diner to the current chain. There were also several community service awards and recognition from various civic organizations. It was clear that James Caldwell's commitment to serving the community wasn't just talk, it was embedded in the company's identity. Emma found that reassuring, feeling like maybe she wasn't crazy for thinking her values could align with a successful business. "Emma, James Caldwell's voice pulled her from her thoughts as he emerged from his office. He looked different than he had the night before, more composed and professional in a tailored suit, but there was still warmth in his expression when he saw her. "Thank you for coming. Please, come in." He held the door open and Emma stood, smoothing her dress nervously before following him inside. His office was large but not ostentatious, with a huge desk near the windows that offered a stunning view of the city, a conference table, and a more casual seating area with comfortable chairs. On the credenza behind his desk, Emma noticed several photos, most of them featuring Tommy at various ages, and a few with a beautiful woman who must have been his late wife. James caught her looking and gave a sad smile. "My wife, Caroline. She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. I'm so sorry," Emma said softly, meaning it. James nodded in acknowledgement, then gestured for her to sit at the conference table while he took the seat across from her. "Let's talk about why you're here. Last night you showed me something I've been looking for in my management team for a long time. Genuine care for people, not just as customers but as human beings," he began, his tone serious but kind. Emma listened as he outlined the position: assistant manager at his flagship restaurant in the heart of downtown, with responsibilities including staff training, customer relations, and community outreach programs. The salary he mentioned made her eyes widen. It was nearly double what she'd been making at Miller's Diner. There were also benefits, health insurance, paid time off, and tuition assistance if she wanted to continue her education. "This is incredibly generous, Mr. Caldwell," Emma said when he finished. "But I have to ask, why me? You barely know me." James leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You're right, I don't know you well, but I know what you did for my son, and I know you did it at personal risk to yourself, expecting nothing in return. That tells me more about your character than any resume or interview process ever could," he said. His words carried a weight of sincerity that made Emma's chest tighten with emotion she wasn't prepared for. "Tommy is the most important person in my world, and since his mother died, I've been failing him," James continued, his voice rougher now. "I thought providing for him financially, hiring the best nanny, making sure he had everything he needed materially, that would be enough. But last night showed me how wrong I've been. My son was hungry and scared in my own restaurant, and the only person who cared enough to help him was someone I'd never even met." Emma sat quietly, sensing that James needed to say these things as much as she needed to hear them. "I've built this company on the principle that restaurants should be community spaces, places where people feel welcomed and cared for. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that in my own locations. Managers like Harvey, who see hungry people as problems rather than human beings, that's my failure. I hired them, I set the tone, and I clearly didn't do a good enough job. What happened last night wasn't your fault," Emma said gently. "You can't monitor every interaction in every restaurant. Harvey made his own choices." James shook his head, disagreeing. "The culture comes from the top. If my managers don't embody the values I claim to hold, then I haven't communicated those values effectively, or I've hired the wrong people, or both. That's why I need someone like you in leadership. Someone who doesn't need to be told to care, who does it instinctively." The conversation shifted to practical matters: start date, training schedule, logistics. Emma would begin the following Monday, giving her time to formally resign from Miller's Diner and mentally prepare for the transition. James explained that she'd spend the first few weeks shadowing the current manager, learning the systems and procedures, before gradually taking on more responsibility. "I won't throw you in the deep end without support," he promised. "You'll have all the training and resources you need." As the meeting was wrapping up and Emma was about to sign the contract James had prepared, there was a knock on the office door. Marcus poked his head in apologetically. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Tommy's school is online too. They say it's urgent." The color drained from James's face and Emma saw fear flash across his expression. "I'm so sorry, Emma, I need to take this," he said, already reaching for the phone. Emma started to stand, intending to give him privacy, but James gestured for her to stay. He pressed the speaker button on his phone, his jaw tight with tension. "This is James Caldwell," he said, his voice controlled but strained. A woman's voice came through the speaker, professional but concerned. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Principal Anderson from Oakwood Elementary. Tommy is fine physically, but there's been an incident we need to discuss." "What kind of incident?" James asked, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. Emma remained still, feeling like she was intruding but unable to leave now. The principal explained that Tommy had gotten into a fight during lunch, something completely out of character for him. He pushed another student who was throwing away food. The other child wasn't hurt, but Tommy was very upset, saying it was wrong to waste food when people were hungry. Emma's heart clenched as she understood what had happened. Tommy's experience from the previous night, being hungry with only $1, had clearly affected him deeply. James closed his eyes, rubbing his temples. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said, his voice weary. The principal assured him there was no rush, that Tommy was calm now and sitting in her office, and they ended the call. For a moment, James just sat there, looking exhausted and lost. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," he said finally, looking at Emma. She shook her head quickly. "Don't apologize. Tommy sounds like a sensitive kid who's processing something difficult. That's actually pretty remarkable, that he cares so much about food waste after what he experienced." Her words seemed to reach James, and some of the tension left his shoulders. "Would you like me to come with you?" Emma asked, surprising herself with the offer. "I don't want to overstep, but maybe seeing a familiar face might help Tommy calm down." James looked at her with an expression of such profound gratitude that Emma felt her throat tighten. "Would you? I know it's asking a lot, and you certainly don't have to, but I think Tommy would really appreciate it." 20 minutes later, Emma found herself in James's sleek black car, being driven to Oakwood Elementary by a professional driver while James sat beside her, silently anxious. "He's never been in trouble at school before," James said quietly. "He's always been such a quiet, well-behaved kid. His teachers love him." Emma could hear the worry and guilt in his voice, the fear that somehow this was another way he was failing his son. "Kids act out when they're processing trauma or big emotions," Emma said gently. "Tommy experienced something scary yesterday, being hungry and not knowing where his next meal would come from. That kind of insecurity leaves a mark, especially on someone as sensitive as he seems to be. Acting out at school might actually be a healthy sign that he's working through it." James turned to look at her, and Emma wondered if she'd said too much, overstepped her boundaries. But then he smiled, small and sad. "You're going to be really good at this job," he said simply. They arrived at Oakwood Elementary, a well-maintained private school with manicured lawns and a modern building that spoke of substantial tuition costs. James led Emma through the main entrance, clearly familiar with the route to the principal's office. The hallways were quiet. Classes still in session, but Emma could hear the muffled sounds of children's voices through closed classroom doors. It all felt surreal, that just 24 hours ago she'd been a waitress worried about losing her job, and now she was walking through an expensive private school with her new boss about to comfort his son. Principal Anderson met them at her office door, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a capable demeanor. "Mr. Caldwell, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, then noticed Emma with a questioning look. "This is Emma Torres," James explained. "She's someone Tommy trusts. I hoped her presence might help." The principal nodded understandingly and opened her office door wider. Tommy sat in a chair that seemed too big for him, his small frame hunched over, his eyes red from crying. "Miss Emma?" Tommy's voice was small and surprised when he saw her. His face crumpled with relief, and before anyone could say anything, he scrambled off the chair and ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist, just like he had at the diner. Emma knelt down immediately, hugging him back and feeling him shake with silent sobs against her shoulder. "Hey, sweetheart. I heard you had a rough day," she said softly, rubbing his back in soothing circles. "I didn't mean to push Kyle," Tommy said between hiccups. "But he was throwing away a whole sandwich and chips and cookies, and there are people who don't have any food at all. It made me so mad." His words came out in a rush, desperate to be understood. Emma caught James's eye over Tommy's head and saw the man's expression crack with emotion. "I know, honey. I know it made you upset. And you're right that wasting food isn't good. But pushing wasn't the right way to handle it." Tommy pulled back, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "I know. I said sorry to Kyle already. He said his mom always packs too much and he doesn't like her sandwiches anyway." The childish explanation would have been funny in any other context. Principal Anderson cleared her throat gently. "Tommy has been very mature about this. He apologized sincerely and Kyle accepted. I mainly called because the behavior was so unusual for Tommy that I wanted to make sure everything was okay at home." James stepped forward, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "We've been going through some adjustments," he said carefully. And yesterday Tommy had an experience that clearly affected him more than I realized. We're working through it as a family. The principal nodded, seeming satisfied with that explanation. Well, Tommy, you're not in serious trouble, but we do need you to use your words when you're upset, not your hands. Can you do that? Tommy nodded solemnly. Yes, Principal Anderson. I promise, he said quietly. The principal smiled warmly at him. Good. Now, your father mentioned he'd like to take you home early today. I think that's probably a good idea. We'll see you tomorrow, and we'll start fresh. James thanked the principal, and they made their way out of the school, Tommy holding Emma's hand tightly on one side and his father's on the other. Once they were outside and heading toward the car, Tommy looked up at Emma with curious eyes. Miss Emma, why are you here? Do you not work at the diner anymore? He asked. James and Emma exchanged a glance, and James nodded, giving her permission to explain. Actually, your dad offered me a new job. I'm going to be working at one of his restaurants downtown now. Tommy's eyes went wide. Really? That's so cool. Does that mean I'll get to see you more? His innocent excitement made both adults smile despite the heavy emotions of the day. Maybe sometimes, Emma said carefully, not wanting to make promises she couldn't keep. But I'll be pretty busy learning my new job. The boy seemed to accept this, though he looked a little disappointed. They reached the car, and James's driver opened the door for them. Emma, can I take you home? It's the least I can do after asking you to come all the way out here, James offered. Emma started to decline, not wanting to impose further, but Tommy's pleading eyes changed her mind. Okay, thank you, she agreed, sliding into the back seat with Tommy scrambling in beside her. During the drive, Tommy chatted more freely than Emma had heard him speak before, telling her about his school, his favorite subjects, and his love of dinosaurs that extended well beyond the book she'd seen him with. James listened from the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at them, his expression a mixture of tenderness and something that looked like longing. It struck Emma that maybe this, his son talking and laughing and being a normal kid, was something James hadn't seen in a while. Between you and me, tell me in the comments, do you think Emma made the right choice accepting this job? Is it wise to mix work with this kind of personal connection? I'm curious what you all think. When they finally pulled up outside Emma's modest apartment building, she felt suddenly self-conscious about the contrast between her life and the obvious wealth of the Caldwells. But if James noticed or cared, he gave no indication. Thank you again for coming today, he said sincerely. It meant a lot to Tommy and to me. Emma smiled, unbuckling her seatbelt. I'm glad I could help. I'll see you Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, James confirmed. And Emma, what you said earlier about Tommy processing trauma, that really resonated with me. I think I need to get him back into therapy. He stopped going after his mother died because he hated it. But maybe we need to try again with a different approach. It was a vulnerable admission, and Emma appreciated his willingness to share it. I think that sounds like a good idea. He's clearly carrying a lot. Tommy suddenly piped up from the back seat. Miss Emma, can I have your phone number so I can text you sometimes? His request was so earnest that Emma's heart melted, but she hesitated, looking at James for guidance. This was his son, and she didn't want to cross any boundaries. James seemed to consider it for a moment before nodding. I think that would be fine. Tommy has his own phone for emergencies. I'll make sure he doesn't bother you too much. You wouldn't be bothering me, Emma assured Tommy, pulling out her phone. They exchanged numbers, and Tommy immediately sent her a dinosaur emoji that made her laugh. Perfect. Now you can tell me more dinosaur facts whenever you want, she said, and the boy beamed. She said her goodbyes and climbed out of the car, watching as it pulled away before heading up to her apartment. Jasmine practically pounced on her the moment she walked through the door. You've been gone for 4 hours. How did it go? Did you sign the contract? Tell me everything, her roommate demanded. Emma collapsed onto their worn couch and recounted the entire afternoon, from the office meeting to the emergency at Tommy's school. Jasmine listened with rapt attention, her eyes growing wider with each new detail. Emma, this is getting really deep, really fast, Jasmine said when she finished. I mean, it's one thing to accept a job, but you're getting involved with this family on a personal level. Are you sure that's wise? It was a fair question, one Emma had been asking herself. I don't know, she admitted honestly. But that little boy needs someone who cares, and his dad is clearly overwhelmed and grieving. I can't just turn my back on them because it's complicated. The weekend passed quickly, filled with Emma preparing for her new position and trying to process the whirlwind her life had become. Tommy texted her a few times, mostly sharing dinosaur facts or photos of toys he was playing with. Innocent messages that made Emma smile even as she worried about getting too attached. She had always been someone who cared deeply, sometimes too deeply, and she could feel herself already invested in this child's well-being in a way that went beyond professional concern. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of excitement and nerves that had Emma awake an hour before her alarm. She dressed carefully in her navy dress and cardigan, applied minimal makeup, and tried to calm the butterflies in her stomach. The flagship restaurant, called Caldwell's Prime, was in the heart of downtown, and Emma arrived 15 minutes early, not wanting to make a bad first impression. The building was beautiful, all gleaming glass and polished wood, far more upscale than Miller's Diner had ever been. A hostess greeted her warmly at the entrance. "You must be Emma Torres. Mr. Caldwell told us to expect you. I'm Patricia, head hostess," the woman said with a genuine smile. She was probably in her early 40s, with an air of confident professionalism that Emma hoped to emulate. Patricia led her through the main dining room, which was elegant but not pretentious, with comfortable seating and warm lighting that made the space feel welcoming despite its obvious sophistication. They passed through to the kitchen where the morning prep crew was already hard at work. The head chef, a stocky man with graying hair and kind eyes, looked up from where he was reviewing inventory. "Ah, you must be our new assistant manager. I'm Chef Robert Martinez. Welcome to the chaos," he said with a grin, wiping his hands on his apron before shaking Emma's hand. His grip was firm but friendly, and Emma felt some of her nervousness ease. "Mr. Caldwell speaks very highly of you," Chef Martinez continued. "Says you've got the kind of heart this place needs. That means a lot coming from him. He doesn't give compliments lightly." Emma felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "I just want to do good work and help people," she said simply. The chef nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the attitude we need around here. Too many people in this business forget that we're feeding human beings, not just filling tables." Patricia showed Emma to a small office that would be hers, complete with a desk, computer, and a window that looked out onto the bustling street below. "The current manager, Stephen Walsh, will be in around 10 to start your training. He's been here for 8 years and knows everything about how this place runs," Patricia explained. "Mr. Caldwell should be in later this afternoon to check on how you're settling in." Emma thanked her and sat at her new desk, still trying to fully believe this was real. Stephen Walsh arrived promptly at 10, a tall man in his early 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a warm, professional demeanor. "Emma, it's wonderful to meet you. James told me about what you did for Tommy. That took real courage and compassion," he said, shaking her hand. His voice carried genuine respect, not the resentment she had worried might come from someone having to train a person with no management experience. "Thank you. I'm eager to learn everything I can." Stephen spent the morning walking her through the restaurant systems, from the point-of-sale software to inventory management to staff scheduling. It was overwhelming, but Emma took careful notes and asked questions when things weren't clear. Stephen was patient and thorough, often sharing stories from his years of experience that illustrated important lessons. "The key to good management is remembering that your staff are people, not resources," he said at one point. "Treat them well, listen to their concerns, and they'll move mountains for you." During lunch service, Emma shadowed Stephen as he moved through the restaurant, greeting regular customers by name, checking in with servers to ensure everything was running smoothly, and handling a minor crisis when the dishwasher broke down mid-rush. She watched how he stayed calm under pressure, how he thanked staff members for their hard work, how he personally apologized to a table whose order had been delayed. This was the kind of manager she wanted to be, competent and kind in equal measure. Around 2 in the afternoon, James Caldwell arrived, looking more relaxed than Emma had seen him before. He was dressed more casually in slacks and a button-down shirt without a tie, and there was something lighter in his expression. "How's your first day going?" he asked Emma, pulling her aside for a private conversation while Stephen handled the tail end of the lunch crowd. "It's intense but good," Emma replied honestly. "There's so much to learn, but everyone has been really welcoming." "That's excellent," James said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Stephen tells me you're asking all the right questions and showing real aptitude for the work. I knew I made the right choice." He paused, seeming to debate whether to say something, then continued. "I wanted to let you know that I took your advice. I found a new therapist for Tommy. someone who specializes in childhood grief and trauma. He has his first session tomorrow after school. Emma felt warmth spread through her chest at the news. That's wonderful, James. I think it'll really help him. Using his first name felt strange, too familiar, but he had insisted she drop the formal Mr. Caldwell now that they were colleagues. Thank you. For everything, really. You've been good for both of us, and you've barely been in our lives a week, James said, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary before he looked away. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both exciting and natural. Emma absorbed information like a sponge, learning the intricate dance of restaurant management under Stephen's patient guidance. She discovered she had a knack for connecting with staff members, listening to their concerns and finding solutions that worked for everyone. The team responded to her leadership style, which emphasized respect and open communication rather than rigid hierarchy. Word spread quickly through the Caldwell restaurant group that the new assistant manager at the flagship location was someone special. Tommy continued to text Emma regularly, usually just sharing small moments from his day, or asking her opinion on which dinosaur would win in various hypothetical battles. She made sure to respond when she could, never wanting him to feel ignored or unimportant. James occasionally texted as well, mostly about work matters but sometimes sharing updates on Tommy's progress in therapy. The boy was opening up about his grief over losing his mother, something he had been bottling up for 2 years. One evening, about 6 weeks into Emma's new position, James called her instead of texting. "I'm sorry to bother you after hours," he said, sounding stressed, "but I'm in a bind. I have an emergency board meeting that just got called for tomorrow morning, and Tommy's nanny quit today with no notice. Mrs. Patterson number 2, apparently. I'm running out of options here, and Tommy's school has a teacher planning day tomorrow, so he'll be home." Emma's mind raced through possibilities. What if he came here, to the restaurant? She suggested. I could keep an eye on him between tasks. We're usually slower in the morning, and he could do homework or read in my office. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Emma worried she had overstepped. "Emma, I can't ask you to do that. It's beyond your job description." "You're not asking, I'm offering," Emma said firmly. "Besides, Tommy and I are friends now. I'd enjoy the company." She could hear the relief and gratitude in James's voice when he finally agreed. "Okay, but only if you're absolutely sure. And I'll pay you extra for the childcare." Emma rolled her eyes even though he couldn't see it. "You will not. Just bring him by around 8:30. We'll be fine." The next morning, Tommy arrived with his father, carrying a backpack full of books and activities. His face lit up when he saw Emma. "Miss Emma, Dad said I get to spend the day with you," he exclaimed, his excitement palpable. James looked exhausted already, clearly stressed about the board meeting. "Thank you again. I should be done by early afternoon," he said, handing Emma a paper with emergency contact numbers. "He's got his lunch in his bag and his medication for his allergies." "We've got this," Emma assured him. "Go handle your meeting. Tommy and I will have a great day." After James left, Emma showed Tommy to her office and got him set up at a small table in the corner with his books. "The rule is you can read, draw, or do quiet activities while I'm working," she explained. "But if you need anything, just let me know, okay?" Tommy nodded seriously, already pulling out a thick book about prehistoric marine reptiles. The morning passed surprisingly smoothly. Tommy was content to read and occasionally share interesting facts with Emma, who would stop what she was doing to listen with genuine interest. Chef Martinez came by around 10 with fresh-baked cookies, claiming he had made too many for a catering order, but really just wanting to meet the famous Tommy he had heard so much about. The kitchen staff, having learned about Emma's first encounter with the boy, treated him like a little celebrity. Around 11, Emma needed to walk through the dining room to check on lunch prep. "Want to come with me?" she asked Tommy. "You can see how a restaurant works behind the scenes." The boy jumped up eagerly, taking her hand as they walked through the kitchen. Chef Martinez let Tommy help roll out dough for fresh pasta, showing him how to use the pasta machine. The line cooks explained their stations, and Tommy watched with fascination as they prepared dishes with practiced efficiency. "This is so cool," Tommy said, his eyes wide as he watched a sous chef flambe a pan of shrimp. "I never get to see this part. Dad's always too busy to show me." His words were innocent, but Emma caught the underlying loneliness in them. She squeezed his hand gently. "Well, today you get the full tour, and maybe later, if Chef Martinez says it's okay, you can help make dessert." By the time James arrived at 2 in the afternoon, Tommy had helped make tiramisu, learned how to properly set a table for fine dining, and charmed every single staff member he had encountered. Father and son's reunion was warm, with Tommy chattering excitedly about everything he had learned. "Sounds like you had quite the adventure," James said, his eyes meeting Emma's over his son's head with a look of such profound gratitude that it made her breath catch. "He was wonderful company," Emma said honestly. "He can come back any time." Tommy looked up at his father hopefully. "Really? Can I, Dad? Please?" James hesitated, and Emma could see him wrestling with something internal. "We shouldn't impose on Emma's goodness. She has a real job to do." His words were careful, but Emma sensed there was more he wasn't saying. "It's not an imposition," Emma insisted. "Honestly, it was nice having him here. Made the day more interesting." The words hung in the air and something shifted in James's expression. "Emma, could I talk to you privately for a moment?" he asked. Tommy was quickly distracted by Patricia, who offered to show him the reservation system, leaving the two adults alone in Emma's office. James closed the office door and turned to face Emma, his expression serious. "I need to be honest with you about something," he began, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she had learned meant he was anxious. "When I hired you, it was because of what you did for Tommy. That's still true. But over these past weeks, watching how you've transformed this restaurant, how the staff respects you, how you've helped my son in ways I couldn't, I've come to realize something." Emma's heart was pounding, unsure where this was going. "What is it?" she asked quietly. James took a deep breath. "I think I'm developing feelings for you that go beyond professional respect. And I needed to tell you because it's affecting my judgment, and because you deserve to know. But I also want to be clear that I would never pressure you or make you uncomfortable. Your job is secure regardless of how you feel about this." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Emma felt her own emotions swirling, a mixture of surprise and something else she had been trying not to acknowledge. "James, I appreciate your honesty," she said carefully, "and I'd be lying if I said I haven't felt a connection too. But Tommy has to be the priority here. He's been through so much and he's just starting to heal. We can't risk confusing him or making his life more complicated." "You're absolutely right," James agreed immediately. "Tommy comes first, always, which is why I think we should take this very slowly if we take it anywhere at all. Maybe just start with dinner sometime as friends and see how we feel. No pressure, no expectations, just two people getting to know each other better." His suggestion was reasonable and thoughtful, exactly what Emma would have expected from him. Before Emma could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Stephen poked his head in apologetically. "Sorry to interrupt, but Emma, there's a situation in the kitchen that needs your attention. One of the line cooks called in sick and we're understaffed for the dinner rush." Emma immediately shifted into work mode. "I'll be right there," she said, then looked at James. "Can we continue this conversation later?" "Of course," James said, stepping aside to let her pass. "Go do what you do best." As Emma hurried toward the kitchen to help solve the staffing crisis, her mind was spinning with everything that had just happened. Her life had changed so completely in just 2 months, from struggling waitress to restaurant manager to potentially something more with James Caldwell. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. 6 months later, Emma stood in the kitchen of Caldwell's Prime, now as the official manager after Stephen's planned retirement. The restaurant was busier than ever, with a waiting list for reservations that stretched weeks in advance. Word had spread about the exceptional service and the culture of kindness that permeated every interaction. Emma had implemented several new initiatives, including a program that provided free meals to families in need, and a scholarship fund for employees who wanted to pursue higher education. Tommy was thriving in therapy, and had become a regular presence at the restaurant after school, doing homework in Emma's office or helping Chef Martinez with simple kitchen tasks. The relationship between father and son had transformed as James learned to prioritize presence over provisions, quality time over material things. And Emma, she had found something she didn't even know she was looking for, a career that fulfilled her, a purpose that mattered, and a family that chose her as much as she chose them. Her relationship with James had developed slowly and carefully, always with Tommy's well-being at the center of every decision. They had been officially dating for 3 months now, taking things one step at a time, building something solid and real. Tommy had adjusted remarkably well, having been involved in conversations about the relationship from the beginning, his feelings and comfort always prioritized. As Emma watched the dinner service unfold with the smooth precision of a well-rehearsed dance, she thought back to that night when she had seen a hungry boy in a booth and made the choice to help him. That single moment of compassion had set off a chain of events that transformed multiple lives. It had shown her that kindness was never wasted, that doing the right thing mattered even when it was risky, and that sometimes the smallest gestures created the biggest ripples. The restaurant industry had a reputation for being cutthroat and unforgiving, but Emma was proving every day that success and compassion were not mutually exclusive. You could build a thriving business while treating people with dignity and respect. You could make a profit while also making a difference. The key was never forgetting that behind every transaction, every meal served, every interaction, there were human beings with stories and struggles and dreams. As the evening rush began to wind down, James appeared in the kitchen doorway with Tommy by his side. The boy ran to Emma immediately, wrapping his arms around her waist in a hug that had become their routine greeting. "Miss Emma, guess what? I got an A on my science project about marine reptiles," he announced proudly. Emma hugged him back, her heart full. "That's amazing, Tommy. I'm so proud of you." Over his head, her eyes met James's, and in that moment, Emma understood that she had found exactly where she belonged. Not because a wealthy man had offered her a job, but because she had stayed true to her values and let compassion guide her choices. The rest had simply followed, as it always did when you led with your heart. If this story touched your heart, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time when you helped someone and it changed your life in unexpected ways. Have you ever taken a risk to do the right thing even when it seemed like it might cost you everything? Share your story, because these moments of human kindness are what connect us all. And if you believe, like Emma does, that compassion and success can coexist, that treating people with dignity matters more than following cold policies, then hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about stories that remind us of the power of kindness and the importance of staying true to our values, even when the world tells us to look the other way. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. We all know people who are struggling, who feel invisible, who could use a reminder that their kindness matters. Let's spread this story and inspire more acts of compassion in our communities. Remember, you never know when a single moment of kindness might change everything. For Emma, feeding a hungry child led to a new career, a new family, and a new understanding of her own worth. For Tommy, one waitress who cared enough to help gave him not just a meal, but hope and healing. And for James, witnessing that simple act of compassion reminded him of the values he had built his business on and helped him reconnect with his son. Your kindness matters. Your choices matter. And the world needs more people like Emma who are willing to do the right thing even when it's difficult. So go out there and be that person. Feed the hungry, help the struggling, show compassion to those who need it most. You never know whose life you might transform, including your own. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.